Thank you for listening to me today. My name is Adrien Bocquet. I'm a French national, and I'm a former serviceman in the French military. In March and in April 2022, I went to the Ukraine through the Polish border, and I worked with doctors and nurses to help provide care for the refugees. Let me just clarify, refugees. I did not in any way take part in the war, either on the Ukrainian or the Russian side. I simply came to assist refugees. Unfortunately, when I arrived in Ukraine, the Ukrainian army came up to us, more specifically the Azov unit. Just to spell things out, I was dealing primarily with medication, and my task was to set up kits and to bring them into Ukrainian hospitals for distribution. We were intercepted a number of times by the Ukrainian army asking for that medication when the medication was to be used for children, just for children. On a number of occasions, we came across the Azov unit of the Ukrainian army, and around the 4th of April, and I may be mistaken by 1 or 2 days, let me just say that in passing, but around the 4th of April, we were in the outskirts of Kiev, and these Azov units approached us. They came towards us, and they asked us to follow them. A number of soldiers climbed into our vehicles, and we headed towards Butscha. When we arrived in the suburbs, we were checked at a number of checkpoints, but as we were medical volunteers, we were not searched or checked because we were with Azov soldiers. So we were allowed through without our passports being checked or even our vehicles being searched. We came to the outskirts, the eastern suburbs of Butscha, and we saw vans which had corpses inside of them. And these corpses were being unloaded on the roadside and on the sidewalks. So there were individuals dressed as Ukrainian military and some dressed as civilians. So these corpses were unloaded and placed on the sidewalks and on the roads. We found that strange, but we continued on our way. And then we came to the center of Butscha, where there were in point of fact a number of trucks that had been burned out, and there were corpses here and there. Armored vehicles had been set on fire, but here again we saw refrigerator trucks, and once again they were unloading corpses on the sidewalks and on the roads. At that point in time, let me just point out that there was no journalist in the city. The city had been completely closed by the Ukrainian military. And we went through with the Azov units. So I asked an Azov serviceman, why are these corpses being placed on the sides of the roads, and who are these people? And the answer was that these are individuals who had passed away, who had died in the northeast of Ukraine. He did not clarify where exactly. That's the answer I was given, that these are corpses that come from the northeast of Ukraine. I found that very shocking and strange. It was odd that these bodies from another city were now being unloaded on the roads and sidewalks here. We couldn't understand. So we continued to cross through the city of Butscha, and we stopped because the military needed to pick a few things up. And at that point in time, we witnessed, I was not alone, we all witnessed Ukrainian servicemen and civilians, the same individuals who had unloaded the corpses on the side of the road. I saw them tying the hands of these corpses with a white cloth. Let me tell you that what I'm telling you now is what I told investigators over hours and days. I told them what I had witnessed. On the white cloth, I didn't think that was a very important thing, and then I realized ultimately that it was an important fact. Let me explain why. I was shown pictures with a bag that had been found containing white cloth, and I confirmed that indeed that was the white cloth that I had seen being put on these corpses. These corpses have been authenticated by you internationally. These civilians had been killed a few days prior to these events, but a few days earlier there had been rainstorms. There was a lot of mud and soil, and these civilian corpses were covered with mud and dirt. They were quite dirty, all of them. And then I understood that something was not quite right, and that is that the white ribbons that had been put on these corpses were perfectly clean. They were brand new. And that's when I understood that, in point of fact, the hands had been tied after these individuals had been killed, and at a time when there was no storm, when there were no rainstorms. So then I understood that what I had seen was a very important event, and that it meant that the Ukrainian army had indeed tied the hands of these corpses after the Russian military had left Butscha. And even if you don't believe me, all you have to do, and I invite you to do this, all you need to do is to look at all of the reports and the pictures of these corpses with their hands tied. Look at the state of the corpses, of their clothing, and then look at the white ribbons and the color of those ribbons. How is it possible for a corpse to be covered in mud and then to have these white ribbons that are perfectly clean? So I understood at that point of time that there was a problem. Unfortunately, we continued through Butscha. We arrived at a warehouse and we unloaded our medication, and then these vans, these trucks arrived, and Russian prisoners got off these trucks. And we were told to hurry up and to leave. Some 50 meters away from us, I heard in Russian someone asking, "Who are the officers?" Officer. And a Russian serviceman responded that he was an officer and he was set aside. And then 3 Russian prisoners were shot in the knees. And then the Azov servicemen asked me to leave immediately, and I realized that I was witnessing something I shouldn't be witnessing. And so we left quickly. And as we left, I turned around, as did to my colleague, a nurse, and we saw an Azov military man execute the officer with a bullet to the head. So I understood that I had just witnessed a war crime. And with my volunteer colleagues, we agreed to leave Butscha as quickly as possible because we were quite afraid. We were afraid for our lives. So we asked to leave very quickly, and we used a certain pretext. We told the militia that we were out of medication and that we had to return to the Polish border to load up new medication. And fortunately, they bought our pretext and we were authorized to leave quickly and immediately. So we left Butscha immediately. Let me just clarify here that I was with a female nurse, a volunteer from Beirut, and I was with a doctor, a volunteer doctor from Canada. So there were three of us. Three of us witnessed that execution of prisoners. And we also witnessed the fact that corpses were being placed on the roads and on the sidewalks, and we had confirmation that these corpses came from cities in the northeast of Ukraine. But at that point in time, I did not understand why these corpses were being unloaded. I only understood that several weeks later when I saw the images and I saw Ukraine saying that the Russians had killed these people. Then, whereas I myself had seen these corpses and the military had confirmed to me that these corpses did not come from Butscha, that they came from other provinces, other cities in Ukraine. And that's when I understood that these corpses were being used, I think, to make people believe that a lot of killing was going on. Of course, undoubtedly, killings took place in Butscha, but not what you were shown in the media. I can tell you that I'm one of the only members of the media to have been in Butscha in the early days when the Ukrainian army recovered Butscha. And let me point out as well that I crossed the Polish and Ukrainian border on a number of occasions, several times with my passport, and I was checked, but also a number of times illegally without having my passport checked. As you know, at the beginning of the war, there were many places along the border were corridors, if you will. There were a number of places where refugees could flee, particularly refugees without passports. And we picked up these refugees and we took care of them on the other side of the border, on the Polish side. I'll try to wrap up quickly. Why am I telling you this story? Well, because when I returned to France, I had the courage to tell my story to the French media. They listened to me, and a few weeks later, they all turned against me. They made me look like a liar, and they twisted things I said, whereas I had simply told them what I had seen. Let me just point out as well that in France, if you say that you've witnessed a crime and that turns out to be false, then you risk several years of imprisonment. And let me just tell you that I was never arrested. I've never been in prison for having disseminated this information that I witnessed crimes in Ukraine. I wanted to clarify that because the information I gave to some French media was turned against me. They twisted the information around. If that information had really been false, then the French justice would have arrested me. I think that's an important point to make because it's very revealing. Subsequently, my life has changed completely. I've had death threats. a number of threats. And things have been very complicated. I lost my job, I lost my house, simply because I told people what I had seen and experienced in Ukraine. I then decided to go to the Donbass to see what was happening on the other side. So a few months later, I went to the Donbass, summer of 2022, to see what was happening on the Russian side so that I could compare. Again, let me tell you that I am one of the only international war reporters to have been in Ukraine and in Russia during this conflict. So I believe that I have an objective understanding of the situation. So September 2022, I'm in Donetsk in the Donbass, and there an attack has just taken place. There's an enormous explosion in the heart of Donetsk. More specifically, a brewery was attacked. And so I go to that site a few hours after the attack, and I realize, I take videos and pictures. I was filmed continuously so that I can assure you of the authenticity of the recording. And I saw a French shell, a French-made shell with a French series number. It was shot out of the Caesar howitzer, a French-made cannon. So we have proof that French weapons have been used by the Ukrainian army against civilians, primarily against a factory in the heart of Donetsk. So I filmed everything. As I said, we have the series number, we have the continuous video as proof of authenticity of this shell. And a few weeks later, there was a press conference, and we provided all of the proof of this attack against civilians. You have the authentication of this French shell that was used by the Ukrainian army against civilians. You may believe me or not. Believe it or not, you don't have to believe me, just look at the proof. I have the numbers on the shells, all of the irrefutable identifying tags that this shell is actually French-made, and it is a weapon that was shot out of a French-made cannon that was given to the Ukrainians. Why am I telling you about this attack? Because once I disseminated that information internationally, 3 weeks later, there was an attempt against my life. There was an attempt to kill me. There were 2 agents from the Ukrainian security services attacked me. They stabbed me several times, and I survived the attack. From that moment on, I understood that people wanted to shut me up. They wanted to kill me, to keep me from telling my story. I know that there have been attempts against my life. It's dangerous, but I'm determined to continue and to disseminate anything I find regarding these attacks. Of course, we're in 2025 now, and I've witnessed some but I'm determined to continue and to disseminate anything I find regarding these attacks. Of course, we're in 2025 now, and I've witnessed some 30 attacks against civilians in the Donbass with the use of French weapons. And I have written to you, I've written to the United Nations a number of times to tell you about these French weapons that are being used against civilians in the Donbass. Unfortunately, I've never received an answer. Today, I'm thankful to you for having listened to me, and my only request today would be, please, I beg you, please send investigators to the Donbass on the Russian side to come and identify these attacks which have been taking place for the past 3 years. Please send investigators, UN investigators, to identify these attacks which have taken place in the Donbass on the Russian side. I have been in the Donbass. I spent some 2 years in the Donbass, and I never saw any UN investigator come to see what has taken place. So today, please consider what is taking place there. Women and children, older persons who were dying, people who have died under the shelling from American and European shells that have been given to the Ukrainians. Since the very beginning, the Ukrainians are using American and European weapons to kill civilians. Please come investigate what is happening there. Please do that for the civilians. I remain at your disposal if you want any additional information. I've been investigating for more than 2 years. I've investigated these Western weapons that have been used against civilians. If you want me to come to New York to give you my reports over the past 2 years of these weapons used against civilians, I will come to New York and I will share everything with you that I have collected. I will conclude by saying thank you for having listened to me. I have nothing to win in any of this. I've lost everything. I lost my family. I've lost my job. I've lost my house. I can't go out into the streets. I have to stay hidden, and I'm afraid that someone will kill me, will try to kill me. That's how much my life has changed. But I want this war to end. It must end. I can no longer watch civilians die in this war. The war must end to save these civilian lives. But as you know, if there have been Russian crimes, those need to be punished as well. But if there have been Ukrainian crimes, they must be punished as well. And I'm here before you today to ask you quite simply to open investigations, to come on site. Please come see what is taking place and what has taken place. That's the only thing I'm asking of you today. Once again, thank you very much for listening to me, and I remain at your full disposal.